Okay,
Start,
good
Dan.
morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO of Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we are glad that you could join us this morning for coffee and conversation. We're going to be hearing from Dave Stitsinger in just a little bit from LCNB, and he's going to talk about bank financing, everything you need to know, and what to prepare for, and how you'll be able to secure financing to take your business forward. So we'll get back to that in just a minute. We are on Zoom, so if you want to ask the speaker questions, I'm sure he won't mind if you either interrupt him or put it in the chat box. If you are on Facebook Live, which is usually our larger audience, type your question in and Laura will make sure that Dave gets it answered for you. So you know who I am, you know what the protocol is. Now we're going to do self-introductions. We'll turn that over to Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy O'Neill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber. And I'm just going to go around as I see you on my screen. If you'll introduce yourselves, Sandy,
Good morning, Sandy Kusnoff with Frank's Glass.
Andy, Martha,
Good morning, I'm Martha. I'm an intern at the Chamber.
thank you. Zach,
Good morning, Zach Bohannon, Congressman Warren Davidson's office.
okay. Jason, are you here? Oh, there he is. Jason, can you hear me? Oh, he's setting up. Okay. How about Tiffany?
I am Tiffany, Director of Marketing with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Thanks, Tiff. Laura,
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
and I think Jason Michael Miller is still getting set up. He's our new Director of Membership and Engagement with the Chamber. So if you want to wave at us, Jason, you can.
You might want to have Gabby stick her head back in again.
Hi,
There's Gabby. Thanks. Okay. Back to you. Dan.
Okay, so is everybody, if we missed anybody, we apologize. I think Nancy got everyone. So Dave, we're turning it over to you to tell us everything we need to know about bank financing our business.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to spread a little information around. In talking with Laura, her and I were discussing, information that might be helpful for people wanting to move their business forward, or even on the personal side of things. So the idea was to give you some highlights and some ideas of what and why banks act like they act sometimes. So one of the first things most clients run into would be, what should I have to begin a loan request of any kind? I'm a vice president of commercial lending for LCNB National Bank, but I originally started out in the retail side, so I have mortgage loan experience and consumer experience and that type thing. So the process is pretty much the same. Gets a little more involved when there's businesses. Basically, what you're looking for is when you're coming to the bank is looking to see who you are, basically, especially if it's a bank that you have not banked with in the past. If it's a bank you're with, they may have current information, checking accounts, things like that, other loans that they've had. But if it's a new bank, they're really looking to see, who you are, where you're at, the current situation financially, those type things. So, because a lot of people say, well, why do they need to know this? Why do they need to know that? And that's basically what the bank is looking for. The bank is looking at the credit risk, regardless if it's a car loan, if it's a house loan, or if it's a business loan. It all comes down to the risk. Really doesn't matter the name of the bank or credit union or whatever it might be. They're weighing out the risk of what you're about to ask them. So, for instance, if you're coming in and you're looking to say, hey, Dave, I would like to buy a piece of equipment to expand my business, or I want to buy a piece of real estate to expand my business, one of the first things we would basically put together would say, we're going to need a personal financial statement on you and on any partner that is in the business. And by partner, we mean anyone that has a 20% or more ownership in that particular company. So we get a personal financial statement. We have blank forms we can provide. They're also on the internet. It's basically an outline of your personal assets, your personal liabilities. We also then ask for personal tax returns, again, from the primary owner or from any other owners of 20% or more. And then we go into the business. And if it's this time of the year, for instance, it's July 9th, we would be looking for the 2023, 2022, and 2021 tax returns. We would also ask for a year to date of some point, whether they're through May or June or whatever, for an income statement and a profit and loss. And for those that may not be familiar with that, basically what that is just that the income statement is telling us where the company is year to date, how it's doing income wise, expense wise, that type thing. And then the balance sheet is showing us the assets, the liabilities, that type thing that are out there. So the bank gets a picture of where the business has been the last 3 years and where it is currently year to date. So that gives us a good outline of what the source of repayment is going to be. So primarily, most banks are what is known as cash flow lenders. So they're looking at the cash flow of the business to determine the repayment of the loan amount, regardless of what amount you're asking. So that is the reason for the personal and the business information. There are some banks out there, you may see some of them on the internet, different places where they are strictly a collateral lender. So let's say you have your business, you don't have any debt on the business is valuated at, let's just say $1 million. You want to borrow $200,000. They're just basing the approval on the fact that they've got $1 million worth of collateral for a $200,000 loan. Not a whole lot of those running around out there in today's economy, but most are cash flow lenders. I often get asked, why do you need to know my personal information if the business is borrowing the money? The reason we do that is, and keep in mind, there are a lot of regulations involved that require us to do some of this financial collection. But the reason we require personal financials is because we look at a global basis too. So we not only look at the business and what the business is doing and can the business pay the debt back, we also look globally at the owner or partners and say, how are they doing? And we roll it all together and we call that a global cash flow. So the idea there is we have had businesses that can certainly afford to borrow the money and take on the debt. But when we add in the personal, the individual owners oftentimes have a lot of additional debt. So we count that in because we don't want that additional debt or personal issues to take the company's cash flow away from being able to pay the debt. And vice versa. We've had companies that have had debt, not able to technically borrow the debt, but the owners are very, very strong and they could certainly cash flow the debt if they had to themselves. So that's why we get the entire picture for everyone. Along those lines, many businesses in today's world are set up as limited liability corporations. So some of the larger national and international banks over the last few years have kind of hesitated on lending to this type of entity. I'm not real sure why legally they feel that they can't. We still lend that way. Most banks lend that way. The limited liability company, we actually recommend most of the time, especially if you're buying investment real estate or a business. The limited liability company puts a block between you and someone who would like to sue you or your business, and they cannot get to your personal assets. So for instance, if Dan owns a multifamily apartment complex and he's got it in his personal name, if someone would fall on that property, they could sue Dan personally and all of his assets get involved, whether it's just not that property, it's all assets. So when you create the liability company owns the apartment complex. Someone falls, they can only sue the limited liability company. They cannot sue or attach anything of Dan's personally. So we often recommend that. In fact, I just had a case the last 2 weeks. An older client owns a commercial property, owns a multifamily property. All of this has been in their personal names for years. No one ever had mentioned to them, hey, if someone gets hurt, especially on the commercial property, seeing how there's a tenant there, that if someone gets hurt there, they can sue you for everything you have. So we're in the process of helping them get out of all that and create a liability company to own the real estate. Now, many people also have limited liability companies to own the real estate, and they also have a separate limited liability company for the business operations themselves. And again, that's another step of protection to prevent your personal assets from being involved in a lawsuit or any case like that. Oftentimes, we see the two different companies. One is called an operating company. That's who's in the building. That's who's operating the business. They pay rent to the real estate company. The real estate company is the one who borrows from the bank. Both limited liability companies, both can have the same owners, just two separate entities as far as the state of Ohio is concerned. So we run into that quite a bit on that. So basically what the bank does, to go back to what we were talking about, when we collect all this information, the bank then begins the process of underwriting. So we're going to underwrite the cash flow, the assets, how the business is performed. Then we're going to go to the personal side, do the same thing. We're going to pull credit bureaus in order to check the credit of the primary borrower or the partners. The credit comes into play quite a bit because it's another indicator of how things have been handled in the past. So the banks are always looking at how things are today and how have things been in the past. Now, as you can imagine, during COVID, things went a little haywire. So, basically business was shut down. So the banks had to make a lot of adjustments on the cash flow and looking at different things. In our case, we provided a lot of assistance to our clients by offering them to skip 6 months worth of payments, added on to the back end of the loan, so they would not have those payments during COVID until things straightened out. The majority of our clients took that option. Didn't cost them anything, didn't affect them in any way. We didn't change rates. We didn't extend anything. It just changed during 6 months. They just simply made no payments. So those are the different things that the bank looks at. That's kind of a unique situation, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. But so the bank takes everything, rolls it all together, looks at business and personal, comes back and says, the company is doing well, the owners are doing well, the credit is good. We're pretty well ready to go. Now, for a little more detail, most banks, and ours included, we look at cash flow, and this gets a little technical, so let me know if anybody has any questions. But for every dollar of debt, whether it is the debt you're currently requesting or debt you already have, for every dollar of debt, the bank looks to see $1.25 in net income. So for every dollar of debt, there's $1.25 in income to pay that debt. That is called a 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. That's the baseline that the banks run off of to see if the company is at that level or above or below. If it's below, it could be a unique situation similar to COVID, or let's say they had a customer that hasn't paid them or something like that. One-time instances we can add back to that debt service. But generally we're looking at, here's your net income, here's what your bills are, here's what you're asking for. Are you on that level? Sounds simple, not all that simple, depending on the entity that's borrowing, but that's in general what we look for and most banks look for is, again, $1.25 in income for every dollar of debt. So once we get to that level, the loan is approved. We're seeing that, hey, everything's good. The next thing we do is look at, okay, what do we have to cover the request as far as collateral? First thing is cash flow. Second thing would then be collateral. That includes, let's say you're buying a new piece of equipment or you're buying a piece of real estate. The real estate would then be appraised. We'd have to do an appraisal to determine the value of the real estate. Most commercial lending is done at an 80% level. So in other words, if the property's worth $100,000, the bank can loan a maximum of $80,000. So it's up to 80% loan to value. That sometimes varies depending on the type of building. If it's a special use building, for instance, like a gas station, you may see that loan to value drop to 70%. Again, it relates back to what I said earlier. It's based on the risk perceived by the banking industry. A gas station, if it were to go under and close, would be much more difficult to resell from the bank's point of view than a multifamily apartment building or something like that. So the risk is higher. So the loan to value goes down. So the bank can lower its risk to that degree. And so if it's a piece of equipment, we usually get an invoice to see what the actual sale price is. On equipment, we can actually loan up to 90% of the equipment value. The difference is equipment is on a much shorter basis because equipment tends to lose its value quicker than real estate, which I'm sure everybody knows that. But equipment can go out as long as 10 years, depending on the type of equipment. So if the chamber was to buy, we're going to go out and buy all new computers, that's going to be on a much shorter term loan than if they went out to say, we're going to buy a building, because those computers are going to depreciate so fast. The bank can't put a 20-year loan on something that at the end of 3 years has lost its value. So that's weighed out in what is actually being purchased. The real estate, if you're purchasing real estate, we go out as far as 25 years. We're a little bit unique in the fact that we actually have a 25-year fixed rate, whether it's you own the building and your business is in it, whether it's a multifamily, a hotel, a retail center, what it might be. We actually offer fixed rates for those, along with all the other rates. So going into that a little bit, variable rates, I'm sure everybody's aware of the economy and what the rates have been doing. Roughly 18 months to 20 months ago, rates were about 4%. Today, depending on the type of property, you could be looking at 9.5 or 10%. That's how much things have changed. And again, keep in mind, that's relating back to what type of property and the risk of that property. So for instance, an example would be if the chamber owns its building and wanted to put a mortgage on it, that is considered owner-occupied property because the chamber is operating inside that property. However, if the chamber says, hey, Dave, we want to borrow money to buy the 2 buildings next to us, and we're going to put tenants in those buildings, those become investment properties. Those are the ones that see the greatest rate change. And again, it relates back to the fact that from the bank's point of view, those 2 properties have tenants. The risk is higher if one of those tenants move out, that it would put stress on the chamber's cash flow. So those are going to be obviously at a little higher rate because of that. So there's a lot of parameters that go into a loan request. One of the things I get asked very often, almost every time, is why do you need my personal guarantee? And a personal guarantee is basically saying, okay, we're loaning money to the business and we have our collateral and I have to sign personally as well. Basically what that's doing is telling the bank, I believe in my business. I know it can pay it back. If the business would run into an issue, I will make sure the bank gets paid back, is basically what the personal guarantee is saying. Many people don't want to sign personally because they don't want their personal assets at risk by signing personally. However, the bank is only allowed to recover what it's lost. So if we have a loan for 200,000 and you pay it down to 100,000 and the business is in trouble and you have to close the business, there's still 100,000 on. The bank would come to the owners and first of all look at the collateral and say, what do you want to do? If it's a piece of equipment, you could sell it, or they would say, look, you're going to have to make the rest of the loan good. We can only recover what's owed. We can't say you only owe us 100, but we're going to go after the $1 million you have in your savings account and take all of that. By law and regulation, we are not allowed to do that. No banks are allowed to take more than what is owed. They are allowed oftentimes to add legal fees and things like that on, but no, are they allowed to just go take all of your assets to pay off a small loan. So those are the reasons to personal guarantees. Now, some banks will waive personal guarantees if the loan to value is very low, if the cash flow is very strong, or if the owner has enough money that they don't really need to borrow anyway. But traditionally, most banks will want the guarantee just as a safeguard to protect the bank if something would ever go wrong down the road, especially when you're doing 20 and 25-year loans. A lot can happen over 25 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of, some of the things that the banks are looking at, why we look at it. It all comes down to risk. However, getting back to the process, once we've established the collateral is good, the value of the real estate's good, the appraisals are done, that type of thing, then we turn it over to our attorneys. They prepare the closing documents, and we're ready to close the loan. The entire process, including real estate, takes about 6 weeks, roughly, from the very beginning time you ask to the time that we close the loan. And again, that is assuming that everything is there at the beginning of the loan request, which is what I try to tell people to try to be prepared. So, for instance, if you have an LLC or a corporation that is wanting to borrow, the bank's also going to need the information on that corporation. So we're going to need to know the articles of incorporation, the operating agreement, and a partnership agreement, if that's what it is, a partnership. An operating agreement is simply just telling the bank, here is the owners and here is who is authorized to sign on behalf of the company. The articles of incorporation that is filed with the state of Ohio, we get all that ourselves and take care of that. But we like to have those organizational documents because then we know who's signing, who is authorized to even request the loan. Real estate, if there's real estate involved, obviously there's a lot of things there. You have a purchase agreement, you have title work that has to be done, you have a buyer's information sheet. So there's a lot of things there. One of the big items that some of the banks in over the years, since I've been doing this 40 plus years, some of the banks have gotten themselves into trouble. There's an item called an environmental report. And I hope I'm not going too fast or jumping all over, but I'm trying to kind of hit the highlights. An environmental report, basically, we have a questionnaire that we ask our buyers to have the sellers fill out. What that does is say, are you aware of any environmental risk with the real estate that you're purchasing? Are you aware, have tanks ever been stored there? Are there underground tanks? Are any of your neighboring properties gas stations, or in the past dry cleaners that could have had water running across your property, things like that? That is a critical piece, because if there is an environmental issue and you purchase the property, you have now just inherited that environmental property, as well as the bank, because the bank did not check to see. So let's say I had a gentleman several years ago that wanted to buy a retail strip center out in Westchester. At the end of the retail strip center was a dry cleaner. The dry cleaner had been there for years and years and years. We get into the process, we're going through it. We ask about the environmental and they tell us, yes, there's a dry cleaner on the property. So we have to do what is called a phase one. So we send out an environmental company. They go in and check the property. In this particular case, the dry cleaner was running their business, and all of the fluids and all of the things they were using for dry cleaning were going down into the sewer, right from the drain inside the building. All that went into the sewer system. Then we find out, in addition, behind the retail strip center was a daycare center, also on the same system and on the same water lines. We were not able to move forward. The bank had to pull back. Well, I should say what we had to do was tell our buyer that you're going to have this rectified. They take it to the seller. The cost was going to be and this was several years ago. The cost was going to be somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million to rectify that situation. That changed the whole process of buying that property, as you could imagine, because the sellers didn't want to pay for that. The buyer certainly wasn't going to pay for it. So, those are the type of things that we run into. The problem the seller had in this particular case is what we found out in the process was the seller's bank, which he had just purchased this property 3 years earlier, never did an environmental inspection. And he is now stuck with a property that he had to put $1 million into it, or he wouldn't be able to sell it unless he just ran into a cash buyer that just skipped over it. So there's a lot of different details that go into the real estate. We also do a lot of, and most banks do, there's a lot of construction, commercial construction. Construction is a little bit of a different animal, but the basic information, everything we need is still the same. The difference is we would also need blueprints. We need cost estimates. And in today's world now, we also have to get, and this is for all banks because this is a federal regulation, we also have to get the builder approved as a builder for the bank. All banks are required to do that. So all banks are allowed to have a list of approved builders. If the builder that's building this particular building isn't on that list, the bank has to get them approved, which means we have to do a full credit investigation on the contractor and his company. So the contractor and his company is going to provide us with all the same information, personal information, tax returns, that type of thing. That is usually not well received because they're not the borrowers, but that is the regulation. The idea behind this is if the builder needs to have the wherewithal to be able to cover the material and things needed to get the project going while they're waiting on draws to come through from the bank. So it's a little bit different as far as how the bank handles it. We particularly, for instance, you may have a building that says, hey, I'm going to need 12 months to build the building. So what we do is we set up a interest only for the first 12 months. You only pay interest on what is needed to draw. So the builder is usually on a 4-draw, what we call a 4-draw system. They get 4 draws and the building needs to be complete. The interest is paid on what they draw. At the end of the 12 months, our loan turns over to the regular loan that the client selected, 20-year, 30-year, whatever it might be. And then during that construction process, as you can see, with all the issues going on with construction, we have an independent inspector that goes out, checks that the contractor is as far along as he says he is when he asks for money. So he can't just ask for money and no walls, no anything are done. But we also legally check all the titles to make sure that there are no liens or sub-liens or anything filed against that. Because if there is, the project comes to a stop because that threatens the validity of the bank's mortgage. So we have to get that resolved. So there's a lot of things that go on with construction that doesn't go on in a regular purchase. So I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, but that's kind of an overview of, what goes on in the banking, why we look at some of the things, why we ask some of the crazy questions we ask. I've never seen a bank yet that ever wants the collateral back that they've loaned on. Even if it's a piece of real estate. If it's a piece of equipment, for instance, and you bought it for $200,000 and the bank has to take it back, we'd be lucky to get $20,000 out of it, even if it's only a year old, because most people know once the bank owns the collateral, they don't want it. They want to get rid of it for what they they owe on it, and it's a deal. So no bank wants the collateral. So that's why so much effort is put in up front on underwriting and cash flow and valuations of collateral, that type thing, so that we hopefully never will run into that situation as we move forward. So that's kind of the overview. I'd like to see if there's any questions or people have any direct questions or anything that maybe I went a little too fast or got a little too crazy with.
I have a question, Dave.
Yeah.
And you said you didn't know, but I'm going to go back to it anyway. So I apologize for doing that to you. So I guess
that's
I
fine.
can ask your opinion. But most startups, as you know, are encouraged to set up an LLC.
Right.
They're not. It's not appropriate to do a corporation and stuff like that.
Right.
So with banks not wanting to loan to an LLC, then that takes a lot of startups, out of the picture to begin with. Is that in any way connected to, because certain banks are, very low risk lenders and certain banks are higher risk. Is that related to the amount of risk that a financial institution is willing to take, or where is that coming from?
I believe it probably is. My thought on that is they've had some bad experience somewhere along the line, and they've set a threshold that, hey, if it's an LLC, it generally is a smaller entity. It's not a larger corporation. We've taken losses potentially on that. There's something that has drove them to say, we don't want to do that. Now, in the industry over the last 2 years with the economy, there have been a lot of banks that have just flat out came out and said, look, if your loan request is not at least $5 million, we're not interested. So that again relates back to most LLCs are smaller operations,
right?
Loan beginning. They're now just flat out saying we're not doing loans for 100,000 or 150,000. It has to be 5 million. We're not going to do it. So I think that's where those two kind of collide. They've had some bad experience, and the cost to do those small loans for maybe some of the bigger banks is just not cost effective. So they'll let those go off to other banks, regional banks like us, and that's our bread and butter. Those are the ones we look at because we're relationship driven. We're not transactional. We want the relationship. So if we do a good job, you're going to say, hey, I'm going back to Dave because they took care of me on that. I'm going to go back there, or I'm going to tell somebody else about it. Where the bigger banks are looking for those big transactions, not always the relationship. So I think that's kind of where it's driven from.
Okay. So I guess I will throw this in there. You can agree or disagree. It sounds like what you're saying is for small business, because we hear this all the time. We talk to somebody, I'm not going to mention any names, but they're with a big bank that's advertised on TV constantly, and we stress, with a smaller business, you need to have a relationship. It's not just a bank. Who's your partner? So it sounds to me like that importance of having a partner as your financial institution is extremely important for the smaller businesses. Because actually, if you're, I understand $5 million, it justifies their process costs, but it really doesn't reduce the risk because they could do $5 million and lose half of that too. So, but a smaller loan, they might only be losing $100,000.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why it kind of doesn't make sense because in I'd say the last 2 months, I can't tell you how many people called me and said, the first question is, hey, do you loan to LLCs? And my inquiry is, why are you asking? He said, well, the bank we're generally with says they will not loan to LLC. It has to be either an S or C corp, and it has to be this dollar amount, or it has to be to me personally. And, so I think there is that risk. Like say, if you're going to loan 5 or 10 million, your risk just went up dramatically. So, you're exactly right. Even if you're not ready to make a loan request, it doesn't hurt to come in and sit down and say, hey, Dave, here's what I think I'm going to be doing here in the next several months. Here's what I want to kind of find out. I've had some clients that have taken a year or longer to get to their project. We have probably met multiple times during that year because questions come up and that builds that relationship. So when it's time to go, we have a good understanding where everybody's at and what's coming and what to expect. So, and even for experienced borrowers or companies that are mature, it still comes down to relationship. In the banking industry, a lot of people move around a lot. It's not like the old days where they used to stay, their whole career. Now people move around a lot, and I can't tell you how many times, like, I've been with LCNB now over 20 years, and I can't tell you how many times people say, I can't believe you've been here that long, or I was with this bank and all of a sudden my guy's gone and I don't know anybody else in the bank. So we try to change that a little bit, not only deal with me, but we also have other people that we bring out that handle cash management and things. So you have more than one face, just in the event something happens, you've got connection to stay with us, and somebody will pick up where I left off, or vice versa. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of the relationship, even if you're not ready to go, even if you're not there.
So as a chamber, a lot of times we will, and it sounds like we're doing the right thing. One of the first things we ask for is, do you have a business plan other than one, that's all in your head, that you can actually show people? And the second thing is, if you're starting a business, develop that relationship now, not when you need it. So.
Right. And, along those lines too, we've had customers that are, like I say, mature businesses, and every business will run into a hiccup sooner or later. That's just the way it works. It's better to have that relationship where you can pick it up and say, hey, Dave, here's what's going on, because they know we're going to see it in the financials. We're going to see something's going on. Hey, Dave, I want to sit down and talk to you about this. I just had a meeting a month ago with a very large customer, and they're in the construction industry, and their first year has been very, very difficult, very rough. So the owner calls and he brings his team, and we sit down. He said, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing about it. Here we're addressing it. And by doing that, it gives us a lot more opportunity to find ways to help than if you wait until it's very difficult and you come in and say, Dave, hey, the last year has been tough. We're not going to make the numbers, this and that. My choices are limited at that point. So again, it gets back to the relationship that we need to keep that door open. And now the company is doing very well. They've had several big deals that have come through, and they're back on track. But it's just an example of relationship that was critical at the time. And it also gave the owner, hey, I got this. It's been driving me crazy. I needed to talk to you. We need to sit down. So it got that off of his back as well. And like I say, I'm probably old school, as you can tell by all the gray hair and everything. I'm probably older than some of the young guys going it. But I have my cell phone is on all the time. And people always joke about that. Well, you need to turn that off on the weekends and on vacations and things. But in my career, I've had people call me on weekends and vacations or whatever. Very rarely. But when they do, it's critical on their end that they needed to talk to me about something. I've had people call on Sunday nights and say, Dave, this just happened. I'm not sure what I got to do. And, there's not a whole lot I can do at that exact minute, but it takes the pressure off that, okay, we're going to address this. We'll handle it. We'll get it taken care of. So that's just my style. I'm just old school. I like to be available when they need me instead of just, when I need them type thing. So, it all comes down to relationship.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Am I blocking anybody else, Laura? Are there questions out there? I don't want to take it away from everybody. Okay. My other question is back to environmental, because
Yes.
I've seen this happen, where somebody is, ready to move the process forward, and they have, the environmental comes back and, it's a problem. So my
Right.
question is, if remediation is required, is that something that can be wrapped into the loan if you choose to move forward or not?
Sometimes it can. It depends on the property, the type property. It depends on the seller's willingness to do that. We've had situations where the buyer actually needed the property, and we had a situation come up. Fortunately, it wasn't anything like the dry cleaner, but the two of them agreed on how they were going to remediate it. The bank was fine. We had the loan a little more than we planned to the borrower, but the seller was basically taking the funds from the proceeds, and the two of them together remediated the problem.
Okay.
Oftentimes, we do a phase one where basically they're going to come out, they're going to check everything. And then if that phase one comes back bad, it goes, the next level is phase two, where they're actually going to drill. They're going to come out and start boring holes in to specific areas of the property. Oftentimes those will come back where it's not as bad as it sounds. Because whenever you hear, oh, there's an environmental issue, sometimes it's just runoff water that can be rechanneled, or you can build, you can build a certain size curb type thing that'll direct it or prevent the fluids or waters from getting into a certain area. So there's certain remediation. So it's not always a $1 million cost, but the issue that the banks put so much weight on that is when the EPA, whatever they say has to be done, there is no discussion. It has to be done. So you can't argue with it and say, well, hey, can't we do this? Can't we do? So in essence, there's no closed checkbook. It's whatever they say has to be done in the end. So that's why we use very reputable environmental companies that are used to dealing with, and most banks do, used to dealing with the EPA, so they don't have to worry about, and they try to keep the cost down. Worst case scenario, it's dug out, it's retrenched, it's backfilled, things like that. Even then, you're probably not looking at $1 million. It's when it runs off into other properties is when the checkbook is just wide open, because you got to remediate everything.
But a phase one can be 10 grand pretty quickly, right?
Pretty quickly, yeah, depending on the property, yeah.
Okay.
The average, I would say, we've seen is probably 2,500 to 6,000, 7,000. But yes, they can. That's what I mean. They can shoot up in a heartbeat. But hopefully the sellers are honest on our questionnaire, and they will tell us if there's an issue that we can get started on before we get too far down the road.
Any questions out there, Laura?
I was that effective?
Nope, we don't have any. Dave did such a great job. No one has any questions.
Well,
I wish that was the case.
I have another question, Dave.
Yeah.
Let's say a small business takes out a loan, and they are, halfway or 75% through the loan or whatever, and the business goes south, or they decide to close or whatever. So the remaining amount on the loan, is that something that the bank can call in, or is that something they can continue to make payments until the loan is satisfied after the business is closed?
Yeah. Well, because the bank doesn't really have control if the owners decide to close the business. Mm-hmm. But so we would meet with the owners to develop a plan on what is your plan for the remaining part. And if they say, well, we're going to go ahead and continue to make the payments, first thing we're going to want to do in that case is get updated financials on them personally to make sure they are financially able to do it, and they're not just saying I'll do it, but I don't have any wherewithal to do it. Right. So we try to iron that out so that we kind of know if our collateral is in there, they're closing the business, and they say, hey, we're going to sell the collateral, but it's going to take 60, 90 days. I'm going to continue to make my payments. We wait till we give them that time, that leeway time, because again, we don't want the collateral. So if it takes that long to move some equipment, sometimes it does on big lathes and different things, we'll continue to try to make payments, or we'll adjust and modify the payments to get to a point where at least they're making payments until we get the thing sold and closed down.
So then I have another question, kind of related to that, but different. Let's say somebody needs to buy, a vehicle for their business for, delivery, construction, or whatever it is. How does that equation work as far as, because there's the value of the vehicle and there's the value of the business. Do you look at both, or how is it?
So you're saying our loan would be the vehicle?
Yeah.
Yeah, we would look at the value of the vehicle at that time. And if they're shutting down the business, hey, are you selling the van or whatever it might be? And then depending on what you're selling it for, if that'll clear out the debt, then we would just sell the van.
Okay.
Allow them to try to sell it first before the bank
Right.
would have to go to that step.
But even if they're purchasing a vehicle, you know, that the business is healthy and they're purchasing a vehicle, would you look at the financials of the business as well as the value of the vehicle they're purchasing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we would loan, again, oftentimes we'll loan up to 90% or a lot of times even 100% of the value of the vehicle.
Okay.
Because it's a critical piece and it's really kind of like machinery. It's a part of the business. So yeah, we would look at definitely at the value of the business. Part of that too is to make sure that they're not overpaying on a vehicle
Right.
because they need it, and all of a sudden they're paying $50,000 when the value is only 40. We also check that to make sure, you know, they're good that way, that they're not over the value.
So for a small trucking company that wanted to like maybe have a second vehicle or something like that, the primary focus would be on the value of that vehicle to do the loan.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's all my
Yeah.
questions.
Well, I hope I thoroughly confused everyone.
I think it was great information.
Yeah, it was a lot of
and-
great information. Yeah, so definitely we'll have this recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel. You can always go back to resource any of the past coffee and conversations on our YouTube channel. It's also on our Facebook page, so you can always go back there to archives of the coffee and conversations on any of our Facebook. So Dave, thank you very much. We'll be back in a couple weeks for July 23rd is our next coffee and conversation. So thank you for taking some time with us. And if you have any questions, Dave, would you like to give them your information in case anyone has any questions they'd like to contact you?
Sure, and thank you for allowing me to take the time to meet with everyone. My information, my email is D Stitsinger, and I'll spell that because you know whenever I order pizza, it never comes out right. So it's DSTITSINGER at LCNB.com. And cell phone, as I say, is always on, is 513-460-0825.
That's perfect. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact Dave. He's always available, whether he's at home, on the weekend, on vacation.
That's right.
But it's that customer service that
Yeah.
and the personal relationship that you give, Dave. So we definitely appreciate that from you. And if there's anything you need from us to make any connections with anyone, we can do that too. So thank you,
Okay.
everyone, and we will see
Thank
you
you.
all in a couple weeks.
All
Have a
righty.
great
Take
day,
care,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.